Welcome to Scaling Financial Operations for Growth, a panel discussion brought to you by the Controllers Council. My name is Neil Brown, Executive Director of the Controllers Council. And before I introduce our expert panelists and our partner sponsor, let me share some brief housekeeping items. We'll have Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please use your GoToWebinar control panel to ask our experts questions. Next, this webinar is CPE eligible with 4 polling questions. So please answer at least 3 polls for CPE or to benchmark your peers. Please allow up to 1 week for CPE certificates to arrive via email. Also regarding CPE, you'll need to attend for no less than 50 minutes and answer a brief survey directly after the webcast today, so please complete. Finally, you'll receive a link to this webcast via email in the next 24 hours. So with that, I'm very pleased to share a word about our partner and sponsor, BILL. New York Stock Exchange, BILL, is a leading financial operations platform for small and medium businesses. BILL automates the future of finance so businesses can thrive. BILL's integrated platform helps businesses to more efficiently control payables, receivables, spend and expense management. Hundreds of thousands of businesses rely on BILL's proprietary member network of millions to pay or get paid faster. Headquartered in San Jose, California, BILL is a trusted partner of leading U.S. financial institutions, accounting firms, and accounting software providers. For more information, visit bill.com. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our subject matter experts. Garrett Lent is Senior Account Executive at BILL. And Joe Flesher is Webinar Content Marketing Manager at BILL and a former CFO.com and Argyle Manager. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you so much for having us. And at this stage, what I'd like to do, appreciate the warm welcome. Before Garrett and I begin our conversation, I do want to outline for attendees what we're going to cover. So when we're talking about organizations that are growing, one way that organizations grow is by characterizing themselves as multi-entity firms. And what we want to talk about for those organizations that either have done so or are looking to do so or considering whether or not to do so, we want to talk about these key areas, what such organizations can do with regard to removing manual processes from workflows, for example, having to do with managing payments, especially if we're talking about payments across entities. We'll also talk about reconciliations for organizations that maintain third-party accounting systems or enterprise resource planning systems, ERP systems, what multi-entity organizations need to keep in mind as they prepare for audits, and then finally, overall, in sum, what multi-entity organizations need to do to plan for sustainable growth. With that in mind, Garrett, I'd like to pose my first question to you. And my first question to you, Garrett, is, first of all, for those who may not be familiar or would like further elaboration on this, what is a multi-entity organization and what are scenarios in which businesses decide or choose to establish multi-entity organizations?
Yeah, of course. So thank you, Joe, and everybody. It is terrific to meet you. Thank you so much for having me here. As Joe said, I'm an AE here at BILL, and every day it's literally my job to talk to organizations such as yours. So I like to think I have a little bit of insight and hopefully some good stories to share along the way. But happy to be a resource for you all and answer some questions of what we see, right? So certainly a multi-entity organization is simply an organization that has different entities set up, and this can be done a couple different ways. In NetSuite softwares, it's set up as subsidiaries. If you're familiar with QuickBooks, they're going to be set up as company files. But essentially, it's different organizations all under one umbrella that work in cohesion together. And lots of different entities, you'll see different things. They'll all have their own bank accounts. Some will have unique email addresses, and others will all have their own chart of accounts, right? So multi-entity organizations are simply lots of organizations that all kind of kind of sit under one that work in unison together.
Thank you, Garrett. Now, we're going to talk about scenarios in which businesses choose to establish multi-entity organizations. We don't necessarily have to go into each scenario in detail, but I'd like to give you the opportunity, Garrett, to highlight some examples and perhaps what the implications of establishing a multi-entity organization is in these scenarios.
And so this is a really good one, Joe, because I've seen a lot. Like, there are so many different reasons why an organization can decide to expand, and instead of expanding on their core single entity, to branch out and open up another entity. You've got a good list going on here. One of the big ones that I see a lot of the time is just for different business operations. We'll see other organizations open up another LLC to perform one specific role in the business, such as logistics or freight, or maybe even like the construction side of things, if that's applicable to your business, right? Others are by a location. So I think the first one you have there is expansion in different markets and regions, right? Maybe it's time for you to move to a different side of the United States and you want to start a new entity to focus on your core business, growing your business operations on halfway across the United States, right? Another real reason why we see people open up entities. You have mergers and acquisitions on there. That's one that I see all the time. Hi, we're acquiring this new organization. We're very excited to bring them into their fold, but they have their own chart of accounts. They have their own rules, policies, everything, but they're certainly going to be joining our organization, right? And that umbrella. So I think you have a great list here, but the reality is that the list is almost infinite. There's lots of different reasons in which businesses would choose to move into a multiple entity structure.
Thank you, Garrett. And I think for organizations that are joining us that are not necessarily sure whether they want to become multi-entity organization, I think it would be helpful perhaps to do something of a level set with regard to our understanding of our audience. So with that in mind, I'd like to pose our first of 4 polling questions. And our first polling question will ask attendees to indicate how they would characterize their companies. And Neil, I'll turn it over to you to cover our first of 4 polling questions, and then we'll continue our discussion.
Sounds good. I'm launching the poll. Which of the following best describes your company? Select one of the following. So please use your control panel to answer questions. Easy multiple choice here. Please take a few more seconds to vote. And we have our majority of votes in. We'll have other polls, so don't worry about that. So I will share the results. Joe, did you want to provide analysis of this at all?
Sure. And Garrett, I'd love your perspective as well. So just to state what's in front of us, we can see that a slim majority have indicated of respondents have indicated that you're with multi-entity organizations. And then the next, I would say for those that are deciding, let's say, what's interesting here is that I think we have a pretty clear split between attendees who either are with multi-entity organizations or are with organizations that have made a decision. So I think that's very interesting. I think so I'm not sure we need to talk more about the responses to the poll, other than perhaps, Garrett, I'd love your perspective before we continue our discussion. Have you observed among growing organizations that you've worked with, Garrett, have you observed any tendency one way or the other to consider a particular type of structure, let's say broadly speaking, a multi-entity organization. What are you seeing among organizations that you've worked with that are growing in terms of how they decide to structure their organizations as their organizations mature?
That's a great question, Joe. What I see a lot, and this is one of those cases where every business model is so unique. For some, it's an absolute no-brainer to start expanding. Others really like having, that one core entity that they grow and try to say, hey, how big can we get this, right? So like when 30% of people say to me that they don't intend to become a multi-entity organization, makes perfect sense. We see that all the time. And for a lot of organizations, that certainly does work. The trends we do typically see, though, is that at some point, the vast majority of organizations that are seeing year-over-year growth do tend to become multi-entity organizations, right? And once again, the reason for that goes back to the last slide you had there of it can be tax reasons, it can be expansion reasons. Either they are acquired by somebody and get brought into a multi-entity fold, or they decide to acquire somebody else, and that creates that multi-entity environment, right? So to sum up, certainly the vast majority of organizations that we speak with do at some point have a plan to expand into multi-entity, but it's totally credible for other businesses to not take that path. So yeah, what I'm seeing here in the data reflects essentially what I see in the day-to-day.
Wonderful. Thank you, Garrett. Well, I want to now focus on a particular